Welcome to our channel of IGNOU Audiobooks. Indira Gandhi National Open University, Master of Social Work, Counseling, MSWC. Second year, MSW 013 Introduction to Psychological Basis of Counseling. Block 1 General Psychology, Unit 4, Personality Theories, Psychoanalytical.
Psychoanalytical 4.0 Objectives. By the end of this unit, you should be able to understand the psychoanalytical theory of personality by Sigmund Freud, the nature of personality explained by the Neo-Freudians, and the various concepts and theories which are common to the psychoanalytic and psychodynamic schools. 4.1 Introduction. Psychoanalytic theory, developed initially by Sigmund Freud during the latter part of the 1900s and during the early decades of the 21st century, formed the foundation of modern psychology. While Sigmund Freud is considered the father of psychoanalysis, and by many, the father of modern personality theory, he was also very strict and stubborn about his beliefs. As a respected scholar, he developed a group of well-known theorists and psychologists who followed him in his psychoanalytic society. But as theories were discussed, questioned, and revamped, many found themselves at odds with the father in their views of the society and the theories. As these members began to break from the Freudian camp, many new theories emerged that have become well received in their own right. As such, these new theories, arising from psychoanalytic thought and the writings of Freud, still maintain many Freudian components. The term neo-Freudian or psychodynamic have both been used to describe those who left the psychoanalytic society and formed their own schools of thought. In this unit we will discuss the theories by Alfred Adler, Carl Jung, Erik Erikson, Karen Horney, Harry Stack Sullivan and Eric Fromm apart from Sigmund Freud's psychoanalytical theory of personality. 4.2 Sigmund Freud. Sigmund Freud, 1856 to 1939, is by far the most famous figure in the history of psychology. Although he was a physician, not a psychologist, Freud's views about personality had strong and lasting effects on the study of personality. Freud entered medical practice soon after graduating from medical school. He worked with Joseph Breuer, a colleague in Vienna who was using hypnosis in the treatment of hysteria, a condition in which individuals experienced physical symptoms such as blindness, deafness, or paralysis of arms or legs for which there seemed to be no underlying physical cause. Out of these experiences and his growing clinical practice, Freud gradually developed his theories of human personality and mental illness. His ideas were complex and touched on many different issues. With respect to personality, however, four topics are most central: levels of consciousness, the structure of personality, anxiety and defense mechanisms, and psychosexual stages of development. It is like viewing man anatomically and physiologically. Anatomy speaks of the structure of man in his various systems or parts, whereas physiology speaks of the different parts of the body. 1. Functional, dynamic. According to the functional or dynamic concept, human personality consists of three systems known as the id, the ego and the superego. These are names of psychological structures and they do not function separately since personality functions as a whole. The id can be taken as the biological component, the ego as the psychological component and the superego as the social component of personality. Since human beings are energy systems, the psychic energy is distributed to the id, the ego and the superego. As the energy is limited, any one system could have control over the available energy at a given time at the expense of the other two systems. The id consists of all our primitive, innate urges. It is called the storehouse of all biologically based urges. These include various bodily needs, sexual desire, and aggressive impulses. The sexual energy that underlies these urges is called the libido. According to Freud, the id is totally unconscious and operates in accordance with what he termed the pleasure principle. It demands immediate total gratification and is not capable of considering the potential costs of seeking this goal. The ego is called the executive branch of personality because it uses reasoning to make decisions. It constitutes elaborate ways of thinking and behaving. The ego's task is to hold the checkable conditions allow for satisfaction of its impulses. Thus, the ego operates in accordance with the reality principle. It tries to satisfy the id's urges for pleasure in a realistic manner. It considers the consequences of various actions and guides behavior in such a way that the pleasure is maximized and pain is minimized. Both the id and the ego have no morality. They do not consider whether something is right or wrong. The superego is the moral branch of personality. It also seeks to keep a check on its impulses, but in contrast to the ego, it is concerned with morality. Superego is what we often refer to as our conscience. It operates in accordance with the moral or value principle. It permits the id's impulses to be satisfied only if it is morally correct to do so, not simply because it is feasible or safe to be done. It takes into account whether something is right or wrong. The superego is acquired from our parents and through experience and represents our internalization of the moral teachings and norms of our society too, structural, topographical. Freud considered personality to be like an iceberg, and most of personality exists below our level of awareness, just as the massive part of an iceberg is beneath the surface of the water. According to him, personality consists of 3 layers or levels of consciousness: awareness, the conscious, the preconscious, subconscious, and the unconscious. The conscious part of our personality is identified with awareness. Consciousness is a thin layer like the tip of the iceberg. At the conscious level, we are aware of certain things around us and of certain thoughts. The second layer is the preconscious, subconscious, which consists of memories or thoughts that could be retrieved by conscious introspection. The third layer is the unconscious, which contains all our experiences, thoughts and motives which cannot be easily retrieved. All of it is unconscious and is the totally submerged part of the iceberg. The ego and superego include material that are partly conscious and partly unconscious. 3. Anxiety. In its constant struggle to prevent the eruption of dangerous id impulses, the ego faces a difficult task. The result is anxiety, which is a state of tension that motivates an individual to do something. This occurs because the unacceptable impulses are getting closer and closer to consciousness, as well as closer and closer to the limits of the ego to hold them in check. At this point, Freud contended that the anxiety alerts the ego to resort to one or several different defense mechanisms. 4. Ego defense mechanisms. These unconscious processes act like a shield and protect our ego from getting damaged by emotionally painful events so that we can still function and deal with reality. These are all designed to keep unacceptable impulses from the id out of consciousness and to prevent their open expression. It is not exactly pathological if they do not become a way of life to avoid facing reality, as it helps one to cope and adapt to life situations. Some of the common ego defenses are repression, denial, reaction formation, projection, displacement, rationalization, sublimation, regression, introjections, identification and compensation, which are described in the table below. Look at the screen. 5. Psychosexual stages of development. Now we come to what is perhaps the most controversial aspect of Freud's theory of personality, his ideas about its formation or development. Freud's views under this can be grouped under the heading psychosexual stages of development. According to him, this is an innate sequence of stages through which all human beings pass. At each stage, pleasure is focused on a different region of the body. Before turning to the stages themselves, however, we must first consider 2 important concepts relating to them: libido and fixation. Libido refers to the instinctual life force that energizes the id. Release of libido is closely related to pleasure, but the focus of such pleasure and the expression of libido changes as we develop. If an excessive amount of libido energy is tied to a particular stage, however, fixation results. This can stem from either too little or too much gratification during this stage, and in either case the result is harmful. Then an individual may show an immature personality and several psychological disorders. The following are the various psychosexual stages of development. The oral stage, birth to 18 months, according to Freud's theory. During this stage, the oral cavity is the focus of libidinal energy. In this period, there are 2 major activities. 1. Oral incooperative behavior, which is pleasurable stimulation of the mouth, in the absence of which, in the adult life, people take to excessive eating, chewing, talking, smoking and drinking, which we call oral fixation. 2. Oral aggressive behavior, which starts when the infant teethes. In this phase of development, the infant enjoys biting. Fixation in this stage results in a personality that is excessively hostile, especially through verbal sarcasm. The anal stage, 18 months to 3 years. During this stage, the anal zone assumes the focus of pleasure. Through society's pressure, mainly via parents, the child has to learn to control anal stimulation. In terms of personality, after effects of anal fixation during this stage can result in an obsession with cleanliness, perfection, and control. Anal retentive. On the opposite end of the spectrum, they may become messy and disorganized. Anal expulsive. The phallic stage, 3 to 6 years, the pleasure zone switches to the genitals. Freud believed that during this stage boy develop unconscious sexual desires towards his mother. Because of this, he becomes rival with his father and sees him as competition for the mother's affection. During this time, boys also develop a fear that their father will punish them for these feelings, such as by castrating them. This group of feelings is known as Oedipus complex, after the Greek mythology figure who accidentally killed his father and married his mother. According to Freud, out of fear of castration and due to the strong competition with his father, boys eventually decide to identify with him rather than fight him. By identifying with his father, the boy develops masculine characteristics and identifies himself as a male, and represses his sexual feelings toward his mother. A fixation at this stage could result in sexual deviancies, both overindulging and avoidance, and weak or confused sexual identity according to psychoanalysts. Later it was added that girls go through a similar situation, developing unconscious sexual attraction to their father. Although Freud strongly disagreed with this, it has been termed the Electra complex by more recent psychoanalysts. Latency stage, 6 to 12 years, this period is a dormant period in which the child socializes and turns its attention outward and forms relationships with others. It is during this stage that sexual urges remain repressed and children interact and play mostly with same-sex peers. 4.3 Alfred Adler. Alfred Adler joined Freud's Analytic Society in 1902 and was even named the first president of the society in 1910. However, after growing disagreements Adler with several other theorists broke away from Freud's psychoanalytic school in 1911, and the concept of individual psychology was formulated in this process. He started his own group which was originally named the Society for Free Psychoanalytic Research. The various concepts of Adler's theory are discussed below. Inferiority. Adler focuses on inferiority feeling, which motivates us to strive for mastery, success, superiority and perfection. We start as a weak and helpless child and strive to overcome these deficiencies by becoming superior to those around us. He called this struggle a striving for superiority. We are not merely determined by heredity and environment. We have the capacity to interpret, influence and create events. Parenting and birth order. Parenting styles. Adler did agree with Freud on some major issues relating to the parenting of children and the long-term effects of improper or inefficient child rearing. He identified two parental styles that he argued will cause almost certain problems in adulthood. The first was pampering, referring to a parent overprotecting a child, giving him too much attention, and sheltering him from the negative realities of life. As this child grows older, he will be ill-equipped to deal with these realities, may doubt his own abilities or decision-making skills, and may seek out others to replace the safety he once enjoyed as a child. On the other extreme is what Adler called neglect. A neglected child is one who is not protected at all from the world and is forced to face life's struggles alone. This child may grow up to fear the world, have a strong sense of mistrust for others and may have a difficult time forming intimate relationships in adulthood. Birth order. Adler often emphasized one's birth order as having an influence on the style of life and the strengths and weaknesses in one's psychological makeup. Birth order is referred to the placement of siblings within the family. Simply put, Adler believed that the order in which you are born to a family inherently affects your personality. Firstborn children are given excessive attention and pampering by their parents until that fateful day when the little brother or sister arrives. Suddenly, they are no longer the center of attention and fall into the shadows wondering why everything changed. According to Adler, they are left feeling inferior, questioning their importance in the family, and trying desperately to gain back the attention they suddenly lost. The birth order theory holds that firstborn children often have the greatest number of problems as they get older. Middle-born children are not pampered as their older sibling was, but are still afforded the attention. As a middle child, they have the luxury of trying to dethrone the oldest child and become more superior while at the same time knowing that they hold this same power over their younger siblings. Adler believed that middle children have a high need for superiority and are often able to seek it out, such as through healthy competition. The youngest children, like the firstborn, may be more likely experience personality problems later in life. This is the child who grows up knowing that he has the least amount of power in the whole family. He sees his older siblings having more freedom and more superiority. He also gets pampered and protected more than any other child did. This could leave him with a sense that he cannot take on the world alone and will always be inferior to others. The only child, Adler suggested, is spoiled by too much parental attention. This person may want the center stage all the time, and when challenged, the person may feel it is unfair. The birth order and the interpretation of our position in the family influence our interaction in the world as adults. 4.4 Carl Jung's break from Freud's psychoanalytic society was perhaps the most disappointing for Freud. Although he was an active member of the society, he resigned from the organization in 1914 after intense disagreements with his mentor, to distinguish his ideas from that of Freud. He used the term analytic psychology, for which individuation is the central theme. According to Jung, personality consists of a number of differentiated but interacting systems. The most important ones are the ego, the personal unconscious and its complexes, the collective unconscious and its archetypes, the persona, the anima and animus, and the shadow. Apart from this, there are attitudes of introversion and extroversion, and the functions of thinking, feeling and intuiting. The self is considered to be the center of the whole personality. The ego is the conscious mind. It consists of conscious perceptions, memories, thoughts, and feelings which make up our conscious mind. One's feeling of identity and continuity is due to the ego, and this is the center of our consciousness. Personal unconscious includes anything which is not presently conscious, but can be. The personal unconscious includes both memories that are easily brought to mind and those that have been suppressed for some reason. Collective unconscious. The main disagreement Jung had with Freud was his belief that there was more to the unconscious than Freud theorized. Jung believed that there were fears, behaviors, and thoughts that children and adults exhibit that are remarkably similar across time and culture. He believed that this was more than coincidence and represented what he called the collective unconscious. It is the reservoir of our experiences as a species, a kind of knowledge we are all born with, and yet we can never be directly conscious of it. It influences all of our experiences and behaviors, most especially the emotional ones, but we only know about it indirectly, by looking at those influences. There are some experiences that show the effects of the collective unconscious more clearly than others. The experiences of love at first sight, of déjà vu, the feeling that you've been here before, and the immediate recognition of certain symbols and the meanings of certain myths, could all be understood as the sudden conjunction of our outer reality and the inner reality of the collective unconscious. Archetypes. The contents of the collective unconscious are called archetypes. An archetype is an unlearned tendency to experience things in a certain way. Jung spoke of the immediate attachment infants have for their mother, the inevitable fear of the dark seen in young children, and how images such as the sun, moon, wise old man, angels, and evil all seem to be predominant themes throughout history. In his view, infants are drawn to their mother because of the unconscious image of mother that is alive in all of us, and that we fear the dark because of the unconscious image of darkness. Although he described many archetypes in his writings, there are a few that have received a lot of attention and thought. These include the persona, animus, anima, the shadow, and the self. The persona, it represents your public image. It is the mask one wears in response to social situations and the demands of social convention. It is the role assigned by society, the part society expects one to play. Persona is the public self, the side one displays to the world, the social facade, pretense. In a way, the persona resembles the superego of Freud. Anima and animusman is basically bisexual. We have both feminine and masculine characteristics. The feminine side of men is anima, by which men can understand women. The masculine side of women is animus, by which women can understand men. The shadowy is basically the unconscious negative or dark side of our personality. It represents the reprehensible thoughts, feelings, and actions which are hidden from public view by the persona or repressed into the personal unconscious. The self. Finally, the self archetype is the unifying part of all of us that finds balance in our lives. This archetype motivates our behavior and makes one to search for wholeness through the pathways of spirituality. It represents the unification of the unconsciousness and consciousness of an individual. The attitudes. According to Jung, there are two major orientations or attitudes: the attitude of extroversion and the attitude of introversion. The extroverted attitude orients the person toward the external and objective world. The introverted attitude orients the person toward the internal and subjective world. Both these attitudes can be present in a given individual, one being dominant and conscious and the other being subordinate and unconscious. Functions whether we are introverts or extroverts, we need to deal with the world. Inner and outer, and each of us has our preferred ways of dealing with it. Ways we are comfortable with and good at. Jung suggests there are 4 basic ways, or functions. Although everyone uses all 4 in varying degrees, each person epitomizes one function. Thinking type, they meet situations in a cool, objective and rational manner. Feeling type emphasizes subjective aspects and values, places less emphasis on thinking. Sensation type, they are able to perceive everything given directly by the senses. Intuitive type, they are intensely alive to all possibilities in a situation. Goes beyond facts, feelings, and ideas and is able to get all the essence of reality. Synchronicity is the occurrence of 2 events that are neither linked causally, nor linked teleological, yet are remaining fully related. Often, people dream about something, like the death of a loved one, and find the next morning that their loved one did, in fact, die at about that time. Sometimes people pick up the phone to call a friend, only to find that their friend is already on the line. 4.5 Erik Erikson's. Erik Erikson believed that the ego Freud described was far more than just a mediator between the superego and the id. He saw the ego as a positive driving force in human development and personality. As such, he believed the ego's main job was to establish and maintain a sense of identity. A person with a strong sense of identity is one who knows where he is in life, has accepted these positions and has workable goals for change and growth. He has a sense of uniqueness while also having a sense of belonging and wholeness. Those who have weaker egos encounter trying times, or who have poorly developed egos get trapped in what is termed an identity crisis. According to Erikson, an identity crisis is a time in a person's life when they lack direction, feel unpredictable, and do not feel a strong sense of identity. He believed that we all have identity crises at one time or another in our lives, and that these crises do not necessarily represent a negative but can be a driving force toward positive resolution. Erikson's stages of psychosocial development. Like Freud and many others, Erik Erikson maintained that personality develops in a predetermined order. Instead of focusing on sexual development, however, he was interested in how children socialize and how this affects their sense of self. He saw personality as developing throughout the lifetime and looked at identity crises at the focal point for each stage of human development. Erikson's theory of psychosocial development has 8 distinct stages, each with 2 possible outcomes. According to the theory, successful completion of each stage results in a healthy personality and successful interactions with others. Failure to successfully complete a stage can result in a reduced ability to complete further stages, and therefore a more unhealthy personality and sense of self. These stages, however, can be resolved successfully at a later time. The first stage, trust versus mistrust. From ages birth to 1 year, children begin to learn the ability to trust others based upon the consistency of their caregivers. Through the parents' responses, the child also learns to trust his or her own body and the biological urges that go with it. If trust develops successfully, the child gains confidence and security in the world around him and is able to feel secure even when threatened. Unsuccessful completion of this stage can result in an inability to trust, and therefore a sense of fear about the inconsistent world. It might result in anxiety, heightened insecurities, and he or she will be apprehensive and suspicious around people. The second stage, autonomy versus shame and doubt. Between the ages of 1 and 3, if children in this stage are encouraged and supported in their increased independence, they become more confident and secure in their own ability to survive in the world. People often advise new parents to be firm but tolerant at this stage, and the advice is good. This way, the child will develop both self-control and self-esteem. If the parents come down hard on any attempt to explore and be independent, or if children are criticized, overly controlled, or not given the opportunity to assert themselves, they begin to feel inadequate in their ability to survive, and may then become overly dependent upon others, lack of self-esteem, and feel a sense of shame or doubt in their own abilities. The third stage, initiative versus guilt. Around age 3 and continuing to age 6, the task is confronting every child to learn initiative without too much guilt. Parents can encourage initiative by encouraging children to try out their ideas. Conversely, if this tendency is squelched, either through criticism or control, children develop a sense of guilt. They may feel like a nuisance to others and will therefore remain followers, lacking in self-initiative. The fourth stage, industry versus inferiority. From age 6 to 12, children begin to develop a sense of Pride in their accomplishments. The task is to develop a capacity for industry while avoiding an excessive sense of inferiority, if children are encouraged and reinforced for their initiative, they begin to feel industrious and feel confident in their ability to achieve goals. If this initiative is not encouraged, if it is restricted by parents or teachers, then the child begins to feel inferior, doubting his own abilities and therefore may not reach his potential. The fifth stage, identity versus role confusion, beginning with puberty and ending around 18 or 20 years old. The task is to achieve ego identity and avoid role confusion. Ego identity means knowing who you are and how you fit into the rest of society. There are a number of things that make things easier. First, we should have a mainstream adult culture that is worthy of the adolescent's respect, one with good adult role models and open lines of communication. Without these things, we are likely see role confusion, meaning an uncertainty about one's place in society and the world. The sixth stage, intimacy versus isolation. This stage lasts from about 18 to about 30. The task is to achieve some degree of intimacy, as opposed to remaining in isolation. Intimacy is the ability to be close to others, as a lover, a friend, and as a participant in society. Successful completion can lead to comfortable relationships and a sense of commitment, safety, and care within a relationship. Avoiding intimacy, fearing commitment and relationships, can lead to isolation, loneliness, and sometimes depression. The seventh stage, generativity versus stagnation. It is hard to pin a time to it, but it would include the period during which we are actively involved in raising children. For most people in our society, this would be somewhere between the middle 20s and the late 50s. The task here is to cultivate the proper balance of generativity and stagnation. During middle adulthood, we establish our careers, settle down within a relationship, begin our own families and develop a sense of being a part of the bigger picture. By failing to achieve these objectives, we become stagnant and feel unproductive. The eighth stage, ego integrity versus despair. This last stage, referred to delicately as late adulthood, maturity, or less delicately as old age, begins sometime around retirement, after the kids have gone, say somewhere around 60. The task is to develop ego integrity with a minimal amount of despair. Ego integrity means coming to terms with your life, and thereby coming to terms with the end of life. First comes a detachment from society, from a sense of usefulness. For most people in our culture, some retire from jobs they've held for years, others find their duties as parents coming to a close. Most find that their input is no longer requested or required. Then there is a sense of biological uselessness, as the body no longer does everything it used to. Along with the illnesses come concerns of death as friends and relatives die. It is, of course, certain that you, too, will have your turn. Faced with all this, it might seem like everyone would feel despair. 4.6 Karen Horney. Perhaps the most important contribution Karen Horney made to psychodynamic thought was her disagreements with Freud's view of women. She countered Freud's concept of penis envy with what she called womb envy, or man's envy of woman's ability to bear children. She argued that men compensate for this inability by striving for achievement and success in other realms. She also disagreed with Freud's belief that males and females were born with inherent differences in their personality. Rather than citing biological differences, she argued for a societal and cultural explanation. In her view, men and women were equal outside of the cultural restrictions often placed on being female. Neurosis and relationships. Horney was also known for her study of neurotic personality. She saw neurosis as an attempt to make life bearable, as a way of interpersonal control and coping. This is, of course, what we all strive to do on a day-to-day basis, only most of us seem to be doing alright, while the neurotic seems to be sinking fast. These people are unhappy, and desperately seek out relationships in order to feel good about themselves. Their way of securing these relationships include projections of their own insecurity and neediness, which eventually drives others away. According to Horney, these individuals adapted this personality style through a childhood filled with anxiety, and while this way of dealing with others may have been beneficial in their youth, as adults it serves to almost guarantee their needs will not be met. The neurotic needs are as follows. 1. The neurotic need for affection and approval. 2. The neurotic need for a partner who will take over one's life. 3. The neurotic need to restrict one's life within narrow borders. 4. The neurotic need for power. 5. The neurotic need to exploit others. 6. The neurotic need for prestige. 7. The neurotic need for personal admiration. 8. The neurotic need for personal achievement. 9. The neurotic need for self-sufficiency and independence. 10. The neurotic need for protection and unassailability. What make Atisi needs neurotic are their compulsive equality, insatiability, and unrealistic nature. As Horney investigated these neurotic needs, she began to recognize that they can be clustered into 3 character types. Compliant type moves toward people out of desperate need for love and approval, and behaves in a highly dependent way. Detached type moves away from people by an exaggerated need for independence, keeps emotional distance between self and others for closeness, causes anxiety. Aggressive type moves against people, has an insatiable need for power and a need to control others, sees life as a struggle for survival. 2 major components of her person's psychology were the twin notions of basic anxiety and basic hostility. Basic anxiety, she said, is what arises in childhood when a child feels helpless in a threatening world. Children learn that they are relatively weak and powerless, dependent on their parents for safety and satisfaction, loving and reliable. Parents can create a feeling of security, but erratic, indifferent, or rejecting parents may sharpen the child's sense of helplessness and vulnerability. This sets the stage for basic anxiety. Basic hostility, in Horney's view, is what usually accompanies basic anxiety and grows out of resentment over the parental behavior that led to anxiety in its first place. Because the hostility cannot be expressed directly parents, it is typically repressed, which only increases the child's anxiety. Children caught in this bind dependent on their parents, anxious because of their parents, hostile toward their parents, and unable to express their true feelings directly tend to rely heavily on one of the 3 modes of social behavior, each of which might well carry into adulthood. 4.7 Harry Stack Sullivan. Sullivan placed a lot of focus on both the social aspects of personality and cognitive representations. He evolved the theory of personality that emphasized the importance of interpersonal relations. Personality manifests itself in the individual behavior and relation to others. He insisted that personality is shaped almost entirely by the relationships we have with other people. Sullivan's principal contribution to personality theory was his conception of developmental stages. Levels of cognition. Sullivan recognized 3 levels of cognition, or ways of perceiving things: prototaxic, parataxic, and syntaxic. Protaxic mode. Protaxic experience is the discrete series of momentary states of the sensitive organism. It is the same as the stream of consciousness, the raw sensations, images, and feelings that flow through the mind of a sensate being. Parataxic mode. It is seeing casual relationship between events that occur simultaneously but are not logically related. You think of a friend and the friend arrives at your door at the same time. You're thinking of your friend and his arrival happens simultaneously but are not logically connected. Your thinking did not cause the arrival of your friend. This concept is similar to synchronicity, explained by Carl Jung. Syntaxic mode. It consists of consensually validated symbols activity which is the meaning agreed upon by a group of people as the meanings of words and numbers have been done. Words and numbers are universally understood by everyone because of the meanings we have given to them. For example, the number 1 will signify a single item. Similarly, a child evaluates his or her own thoughts and feelings against those of others and gradually learns relationship patterns in his or her society. Self-attitudes are shaped by the reactions of significant others to the child. Stages of development. Sullivan contends that personality is not determined at an early stage and that it may change at any time as new interpersonal relations develop. He saw interpersonal development as taking place over 7 stages, from infancy to mature adulthood. Personality changes can take place at any time but are more likely to occur during transitions between stages. Infancy, age, birth to 1 year. The child begins the process of developing. Childhood, age 1-5. The development of speech and improved communication is key in this stage of development. Juvenile, age 6-8. The main focus as a juvenile is the need for playmates and the beginning of healthy socialization. Pre-adolescence, age 9-12. During this stage, the child's ability to form a close relationship with a peer is the major focus. This relationship will later assist the child in feeling worthy and likable. Without this ability, forming the intimate relationships in late adolescence and adulthood will be difficult. Early adolescence, age 13-17. The onset of puberty changes this need for friendship to a need for sexual expression. Self-worth will often become synonymous with sexual attractiveness and acceptance by opposite sex peers. Late adolescence, age 18-22 or 23. The need for friendship and need for sexual expression get combined during late adolescence. In this stage, a long-term relationship becomes the primary focus. Conflicts between parental control and self-expression are commonplace, and the overuse of selective inattention in previous stages can result in a skewed perception of the self and the world. Adulthood, age 23 onwards. The struggles of adulthood include financial security, career, and family. With success, during previous stages, especially those in the adolescent years, adult relationships and much needed socialization become easier to attain. Without a solid background, interpersonal conflicts that result in anxiety become more commonplace. 4.8 Erich Fromm. Fromm is identified with the social, psychological theories. He focuses on describing the ways in which the structure and dynamics of a particular society shape its members so that their social character fits the value of that society. Because human beings have been separated from nature and from others, they experience isolation and alienation. People can either unite themselves with others by learning how to love, or they can find some security by conforming their will to an authoritarian society. Human beings are unique in that they possess self-awareness, reason, imagination, and the capacities to love and to experience loneliness and uprootedness. People have 5 needs that arise from the human condition. The need for relatedness, actively and productively loving others, thus implying knowledge, understanding, care, respect, and responsibility. The need for transcendence, rising above animal nature by becoming a creative being. The need for rootedness, wanting to feel a sense of connectedness with the world, nature, and others. The need for identity, striving for a sense of personal identity and uniqueness in order to make sense out of the world. The need for a frame of orientation, a stable way of making sense out of the world. Personality orientations. Erich Fromm described 6 major personality orientations: receptive, exploitative, hoarding, marketing, productive, and necrophilous. The first 4 are pathological and self-destructive, while the 5th represents a positive and open personality. The last one is the lover of death, which opposes the rest, while all the others are attempts at defining and understanding life. Necrophilia attempts to destroy life. Receptive orientation. The receptive individual is characterized by a heavy lack of creativity. These people tend to expect things which they desire to come to them and rarely feel confident in their own abilities. Exploitative orientation. The exploitative character manipulates others to get his way. These people love to lead, and sometimes disdain those that they feel are below them. Exploitative people are confident in their image and tend to support authority as long as it works for them. Hoarding orientation. The hoarding character views the world as possessions. People are possessed, ideas are possessed, and love is possessed. This kind of person cannot bear losing these possessions, and relates to them to such a degree that they are their possessions. Marketing orientation. The marketing orientation describes the mindset in which a man perpetually molds himself into society's image in order to fit the expected norms of society. He regards people as objects or mere commodities to be bought and sold. Productive orientation. This is, to Fromm, the man without a mask. He has found a legitimate solution to life, and that is to learn to continually relate and become one with the world and its dilemmas, thus solving the problem of his disassociation from nature and his knowledge of the self. Necrophilous orientation. This kind of person stands alone from the others in that he, instead of attempting to find a solution to life, seeks to destroy it. These people are often fascinated by death, and find war and destruction as not necessary, but desirable. These people have escaped entirely from the problem of man's separation of nature and his knowledge of himself. 4.9 Summary. Even though psychoanalytic personality theories vary dramatically in their specifics, they share a common lineage and several core concepts. Scholars agree that Sigmund Freud, who wrote the first comprehensive theory of personality development, laid the foundation for all subsequent psychoanalytic theories. Similarly, the fundamental principles that tie psychodynamic theories together can be traced back to Freud's theory of psychoanalysis. Aspects of personality development common to all psychodynamic theories are: 1. The existence and importance of the unconscious, and 2. The significance of childhood relationships and experiences in shaping personality. Psychodynamic theories are often further categorized according to other features they share, but there is no consensus on how various theories should be grouped. Moreover, many advocates of a psychoanalytic approach contend that, although various factions may they agree on the abstract theory that guides their understanding of personality, their Therapeutic techniques or clinical theories are much more similar than different. Thank you for watching. We will see you in the next video with next chapter.